model's outputs are a starting point for those forecasts. The model's outputs are not in and of themselves a forecast. So I just wanted to touch on evolution of the model as well. The first two results I've reported to you before. We had the originally notified PAUP, which gave us 64,000. Yeah, 64,000 feasible dwellings that were also enabled. We used that same model to test the changes to the residential rules, that is the relaxation of density in the mixed house suburban zone, changes to the FAB zone and that kind of thing, which resulted in 181,000 dwellings. There was a bit of pushback on that number, and to be fair, the model wasn't that good really anyway. So a revision to the model was undertaken in fairly short order, version 2, which basically imposed a price ceiling on the 181,000 dwellings, and said, well, these dwellings are too expensive for where the model's putting them, so they'll never sell for the price that it's calculated, so cut them out. In version 3, which is in response to the directions that I put up before, we decided to calibrate the dwellings prices to the price ceiling, so that everything that the model was trying to sell was at or below the ceiling that we'd set for that location as well, which further improved the chances of something being both feasible and below the ceiling. In my first set of evidence and what's included in the expert group's report, the answer that fell out of the model was 198,000 to 256,000. In doing so, I made an error that's been corrected, and now apartments are being assessed properly, and that's increased to 224 to 308,000. So that looks like quite a big range, but in reality, the big change is to the left and the right-hand side of that red line that's up there, which is the decision to alter the residential rules to relax them considerably from the notified version. You can see the main upper and lower ends of the modelling that we've done, and after quite some time we've effectively ended up back where we started, which those changes have made a big difference. How big a difference? We'd have to run the originally notified port data through our new model to see exactly how different it is, but I think it's fair to say that the changes to the rules have made a big difference. It's probably also worth reiterating at this point that we haven't run the spatial changes that are now withdrawn, so I don't have any information about how big a difference that might have made. Similarly to the numbers overall, where the model is choosing to develop is pretty similar, which is pretty unsurprising given that the actual spatial pattern of the zoning is consistent through all of them. The colours on these maps are basically indicating how many dwellings per site or per development would result. Red is more, they're bigger dots as well, but the idea is just to show the pattern, which is pretty consistent. We get quite a lot of smaller developments, I guess in the outer suburbs, and quite a few larger developments in the centres, in the CBD in particular. So the only way to change that pattern is to really alter the spatial distribution of opportunities through the zoning pattern, if that is indeed something that you wanted to do. This graph just covers something that I saw in the, I guess, the debate on the rezoning, and I just wanted to cover some of this. What is the model telling us about how land value and development relates? The colours on the graph are green for houses, blue for terraces, and red for apartments, and the lighter colours of those indicate infill versus redevelopment. So infill is that we're putting a new house in the backyard of an old one, and red is that we take the old house away and put 2 new ones or 3 new ones there. So starting from the left-hand side is a lower value sales location. The model chops up the region into 10 different sales areas basically. And number 10 on the left, a very high value area. So you can see this is from the maximum return scenario. The feasible developments that we get coming out are largely dominated by houses and infill. Numbers on the left are proportional on the right. And as land value increases, the incentive to redevelopment increases, and the incentive to utilise land more efficiently also increases, or the ability to do so does. It's probably also worth noting that the actual numbers in each of those sales band is really a function of the regulations that we're testing. So if there were more opportunities for houses in, I don't know, location 6, for example, those bands might have been bigger, but would the proportion be different? I'm not sure at this stage. This is something that I've pulled out before. I presented it to a number of people, and it's been a little bit difficult to explain, so I'll take some time to do so. But what this is really about is indicating how land value and the value of floor space, which we understand to be a big driver of how much people are willing to pay from some hedonic analysis that we've done before, which is about explaining what is the key variable that explains differences in prices when you exclude all other things. The actual internal space of a dwelling is something which explains a significant variation in prices over and above views, size of the site and all that kind of thing. So, it is a key driver, and it's also how the model sets its sale prices as well. So it's fairly consistent. But basically what this does is this is a scatter plot of all the viable developments that have popped out. You can see that the sale price per square metre is in little groups of lines. That's just, the model only has a few different types of development to sell, so they're all underlined there. But anyway, when they're grouped together, you can see that the house one, unfortunately the colours didn't come out very well, the house line is quite steep. That's because for every square metre of land, you've got to sell that square metre of land plus the cost of construction. Apartments, which is the red line, for example, they cost more per square metre to build, but can absorb the land cost into more apartments. So effectively what that means is that where land value gets greater, more intensive developments can deliver cheaper floor space, but only at quite a high end. So, and it's also worth noting that those particular curves are a function of the regulations tested as well. In relation to that, we do have outputs, and sorry, these maps aren't quite as easy to read, but what I wanted to get across here was the different patterns. So I've got 2 scenarios. It is possible that the plan, the rules and spatial pattern that is now in the council submission could deliver quite a range. We've done a minimum price scenario to select basically the development that delivers the cheapest dwellings out of those that are viable, and that just is contrasted with the maximum return one. So developer will choose or would like to choose to do the maximum return, but it also shows that say if large expensive houses are fully supplied into the market, there is an option to do something else as well. But the first preference is to do something that delivers the most profit, which is fair enough. So there's a lot of things we can use the model to investigate. Some of them we've started to do already, and I'll show you a couple of maps in a minute about how we've done that. But at a high level, the model is also spatial, as you've seen. We can pull out a whole lot of data, graphs and tables and things like that. I'm a geographer, I like spatial stuff. So we can use the model to see how well our regulations align to a whole range of things. Some of them are the development strategy and the Auckland plan. Obviously that's the end result after 40 years. Should the PAUP be doing all of that? That's something else. The council stated rezoning principles, how much development have we put in within walking distance of a centre or a train station, things like that. There's big interest from our infrastructure providers as well about how well what is feasible is going to align with what they thought was going to happen. Because the data is very atomistic, that is, it's developed at a very fine grain and has a lot of categorisation in it. We can slice and dice the data in all sorts of ways, using multiple criteria about size, price, land zone, all sorts of things. There's a whole lot of interest from economists as well, particularly around taking this as a basis for forecasting. I've had quite a few chats to Chris Parker, and I think there's at least a few PhDs sitting in taking this information and developing a fully integrated and dynamic economic model, which we just haven't had the time to do yet. And also we can do quick assessments based on the average value that we've found in terms of feasibility from zone to zone and place to place, and that is something that the panel have actually asked me to do, and I've provided it to them. It is now up on their website, which basically says if I change from this zone to this zone, is it going to make a big difference or not? In terms of the spatial results, these are the heat maps that the panel had requested. On the left-hand side is the existing relative density of residential dwellings in the city by mesh block, which is just the area that we aggregate the information up to. So you can see there that apart from the CBD, on an average basis, most of suburbia is pretty much consistent. There's a few blue patches there, which are mostly the industrial areas, a few residential areas as well, and there's a couple of little patches that I should point out as well. Is there a laser on here? Don't know. Yeah, no, I don't want to press the button and see what happens. That in Ponsonby, Mount Roskill and Onehunga in particular, they're slightly more dense than the rest of the urban area. On the right hand side is relative density of change. So you can see the locations that are blue. It doesn't appear to be too much. Red is more, and yellow somewhere in between. You can see that there's a predominance of apartments, mainly in the CBD. Takapuna seems to be a good place. Glen Innes out west and down south, and there's a fairly obvious hole in the middle as well.
Sure is.
So just as a reminder, I guess, just about how we have the ability to do further analysis. This is just a quick visual one, just to remind you that that's the development strategy map. If you squint your eyes, you can imagine that to be a heat map in shades of beige instead of blue through to red, just to help you consider that. The map on the right hand side are sites with capacity that we could test with their zoning, and again, you do have the ability to think of that as a heat map as well. Where the capacity is that is available to be tested obviously predominates in how much comes out the other end in terms of what is feasible as well. So there's a lot more we can do. I think there's a lot more that the panel will ask us to do, but in reality it is a new and exciting field. This is pretty world-leading stuff, and it will take a while for people to get their heads around what it means, how we can use it, that kind of thing as well. There's also a lot of new information and new data that's coming in, but the model is a function of the IHP and the expert group. So at this stage we're kind of keeping it in that frame, but I think post the PAUP hearings process, I think there will be a need for us to, I guess, internalise it a little bit more. There's quite a lot of, I guess this touches on the other thing as well about how people are learning. All of us are learning about this. Perceptions of consistency. Is it better to be consistent than right? Is it okay that the model tells us something useful, or should it be perfect?